This is the opportunity for men of courage who have been speaking softly behind the scenes to come forward and say, look, this system is dead. We cannot reform it. We have to move out from under it. These guys are losing money. They're seeing their whole systems collapse. Their corporations are unraveling. Their institutions like the European Union are coming apart. Our job is to speak boldly and tell the truth. And if someone says you can't win, just tell them, go out and fight. Let's see whether you can win or not.
Hey friends, thanks for tuning in. I am extremely happy to have back on the line our good friend, Harley Schlanger. He's going to help us break down all things Brexit. And boy, do we need help breaking down Brexit. Why? Because so many naysayers out there are already saying this is all by design. But I want to play devil's advocate to that perspective. Harley, welcome back. Lots to discuss.
Good to be with you, Sean.
Harley, what is your perspective on Brexit? Is this a rise in the tide for humanity?
Well, it opens a door. It opens a big door. And for people who think everything is controlled from the top, all you have to do is look at what's happening now as a result of this. Now, some people will say, well, they want confusion, they want chaos. They have it. They had it before the Brexit vote. If anything, I think it was that people were a little shocked in Europe by the Brexit vote, because many people I've been talking to here, and I'm in Europe now, many people were saying that the assassination of the British Member of Parliament was done so as to ensure the defeat of Brexit. And you saw the polls turn, and we know how polls are manipulated and everything else. But let me just make a very simple statement about this. The Brexit vote didn't cause anything. It was a result of a breakdown of the system, and it exposes the bankruptcy of the transatlantic system. There was no plan B. The elite some of the elite in the city of London are trying to come up with a counter plan. But if you look at what's happened since the vote, Barclays stock has fallen 32%. Royal Bank of Scotland has fallen 31%. Lloyd's has fallen 30%. They've taken a huge hit. And the fear of the oligarchy is that with the British leaving the European Union, this will give courage to others in Europe to break with the City of London and its bankers' dictatorship in Brussels. So, people might say, well, they want chaos. They've had chaos. We've been living in a chaotic world. What this does is it clarifies the fact that there's no solution to the current crisis in the European Union without a dramatic change in banking and economic policy. Now the question is to make sure that the opportunity does not go without a real solution.
Well, Harley, you say the system was doomed even before Brexit, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. So many out there saying this was by design. I'll tell you what, if this was by design, then why does the stay side in the EU argument want a Brexit revote? And even the European Parliament is saying it's not the EU philosophy that the crowd can decide its fate. That came from Schultz. These people did not want Brexit to occur. They did not want the vote to go the way it went. And now we're seeing dominoes fall. The derivatives collapsing behind the scenes must really be creating a lot of dead bodies. Where does this end? How quickly does the EU disintegrate? Because it's my understanding that the vote was actually non-binding and it will be ultimately left up to Parliament, who has final say. Are they going to try to wiggle out of this?
No, I think the vote, there's no way they can continue to say they're a democracy and then run away from it. But look, it's much bigger than just the Brexit, because the other side of this, and this is what a lot of people are losing sight of, is that Obama went to Europe not that long ago with two purposes, or three purposes. One was to tell the British why they need to stay in the EU. And I think this also spurred the Brexit vote, because
it did.
The Brits look at Obama and, who is this nitwit telling us what to do? Secondly, he went there to insist on the buildup of NATO. And this is causing enormous tensions right now, as the German coalition government may break up. The Italian president, and now the big three in Europe, with Cameron out are Hollande in France, who's extremely weak, Merkel in Germany, who's weak, and Renzi in Italy, who's weak. But Renzi just went to Russia, to the St. Petersburg Forum, and met with Putin and came back and said we should do something about sanctions. Uh, the third thing Obama was trying to do is push through the TTIP, the free trade agreement. And today, the French Prime Minister Valls said TTIP is finished. So Obama failed on all three intents. Now, again, you don't take such a high profile puppet as Obama, who's a puppet of these interests, and put him out there to push on three flanks, all of which are falling apart. Now, the most important right now is still the NATO eastward drive, because the extent to which the US is demanding that, with the Brits moving out of the EU, NATO is shaking a little bit. They're not sure what this means for the security arrangements. And the British are the second or third most strongest power in NATO in terms of money and actual force. And they've also been pushing very hard for this confrontation with Russia and for the continuation of sanctions. So the whole strategy of terrorism, of immigration and refugee crisis, of the bailout of the big banks, the quantitative easing, negative interest rates, austerity regimes, all of this is profoundly shaken. And I was in Berlin this last weekend at a conference where we had parliamentarians from a number of countries. We had military leaders from France and Germany. We had think tankers. We had journalists. We even had a really beautiful report from the woman who is a top advisor to Assad on what the Syrians want. And at this conference, there were two topics that kept coming up. One was, where does Europe go now? Does this mean the end of globalization? Does it mean the end of free trade, the end of the deregulated system? And the second thing that kept coming up is people asking me, knowing I represent LaRouche and I'm from the United States, if Trump is elected, does that mean the US would become isolationist? And I'll tell you, Sean, people would much prefer the United States to retreat into isolationism, which I don't think Trump is going to do and I don't think is the right thing, but retreat into isolation than have Hillary elected. Now, the point on isolationism is that that's sort of a phony concept. The real concept is stop engaging in these stupid wars. And that's something that I think Trump might do. He might pull back from these wars. But there was a lot of interest in Europe on what Brexit would mean in the United States.
Okay, well, I want to get to that, and I want to talk about Hillary, because clearly, given all that Obama has done and all his failures, the person who would take the baton from him is Hillary, and it would just be more of the same. That's what the world fears. But I want to ask you about Europe. What is going to happen here as a result of Brexit? I guess here's one way to approach it. Let's talk about the infighting at the highest levels, right? Because again, for those who say this is all by design, okay, if that's true, then why did Soros lose on the Brexit bet? And we saw the Queen backing Brexit. And now we see calls from the foreign ministers of France and Germany for a European superstate.
Yeah.
They're saying EU nations should be morphed into one post-Brexit. What's going on, Harley? It just seems like an awful lot of infighting as they try to stitch together some sort of faux EU.
Imagine what it would be like to be in a movie theater that's on fire with sticks of dynamite on every seat.
Yeah.
You know, you've got a scramble, and the scramble takes two forms. One, there is an element of still hopefulness that there can be some kind of union that would work. And there are elements of the EU that people do like. The fact that you no longer have to go through passport control going from country to country, that you don't have to change money all the time, that there are certain transfer of goods and services which are easier. But what people are objecting to is the domination by elites who are acting for corporate interests, especially banking and insurance, and are dictating policies to governments. So within virtually every country in Europe, there are splits occurring in the parties that have been the dominant parties since the end of World War II. In Germany, the Christian Democrats are split down the middle. And the Socialist Party is also split in Germany, and you have a coalition government now of the Socialists and the Christian Democrats. They don't have a strategy. Are they going to go with austerity? Are they going to demand that all the debts be paid, which was the previous policy, and risk having the euro collapse further? What about the Italians? Are they going to bail out their banks? Or are they going to move to some form of national banking and possibly Glass-Steagall? We had a speaker from Italy who's a member of parliament who's introduced a Glass-Steagall resolution in the Italian parliament and says it's more likely to pass now than ever. In France, Hollande is about 18% popularity. Sarkozy, the former president, who's a bit of a nutcase, he went to St. Petersburg to the forum, met with Putin, and came back and said that Europe should lift the sanctions. In Britain itself, you talk about lack of consensus. The fact that Cameron is giving himself 4 more months has a lot of people angry in the Tory party. There's a huge fight in Labour, and Tony Blair, probably next to Obama, one of the most dangerous men on the planet. Blair is all over the place trying to pull together a new Labour, which would be pro-EU, pro-free trade, pro-TTIP, and so on. Now, the important thing, Sean, is that in each of these countries, there are real problems that have resulted from the European Union. Countries have huge debts. These are the banks are overloaded with worthless assets. Much of it is derivatives, but a lot of what they're calling their real equity assets are worthless, are no good. No one knows exactly what to do with this. I mean, I do. You should cancel it. Write it down. Put in a Glass-Steagall and get rid of the gambling debts. That hasn't come up generally as a solution yet because everyone's trying to figure out how do we save the system, even though the system is broken. And I think that's where people who are trying to say all of this is pre-planned just don't know reality.
Right.
You can't plan these kinds of events. Their plan was to have Russia and China back down, become part of the New World disorder, open their economies for looting, give back the money China has to bail out the system, and that didn't happen. Now, does that mean that the BRICS were set up by the Rothschilds? No, this is a new system that's coming into being. It's weak, it's rough, but it's attractive because the Chinese are starting to lay down rail, they're starting to build power plants, they're making loans, Putin was just in China and made some agreements. Even the Japanese now are moving toward Russia. And interestingly, you probably saw this, Erdogan of Turkey is now reaching out to Russia because he's looking at Europe and saying maybe Europe isn't the best place for us to be.
Well, Harley, we also have Nigel Farage at the EU Parliament on Tuesday saying, "You're not laughing now, are you?" Now, again, Nigel Farage, have you met Nigel?
No, but I watch him on YouTube quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's quite a character, but he's really the EU's version of Ron Paul. I mean, quite the truth teller. Of course, he's the leader of UKIP, and it was Nigel Farage who really is the person who sparked all of this and ultimately led to the Brexit referendum. And I think their EU House of Cards are falling like World Trade Center 7, except they didn't plant all of the explosives in this one. It's coming down around them. I want to get your opinion on the derivatives bubble. What do you think is going on behind the scenes? Any insight on that? Can you give us any insight on what's going on over at Deutsche Bank, which Bill Holter and I talk about very often? I think Deutsche Bank is the symbol of the derivatives Ponzi exploding from within. Deutsche Bank has to be on life support at this point.
Well, Deutsche Bank has done everything they can to downsize, to cut their costs, close offices, except their offices in London, and that's their derivatives business. What they're hoping for is that Merkel will be replaced by Schäuble, who's the current finance minister, because Schäuble will continue bailing them out. There are others in Germany, including at the Bundesbank, who are saying, let Deutsche Bank go. But Deutsche Bank is probably the best symbol of what's happening overall in European banking. Royal Bank of Scotland, Lloyds, Barclays, they're in terrible shape because they're carrying huge volumes of worthless sovereign debt and they're trading derivatives like crazy. They're stuck with oil derivatives and the fact that oil's gone up a little bit. They're hoping they can squeeze something out of that. The Spanish banking system, Santander, part of the Alpha Group, they're in horrible shape. BNP Paribas, the second largest bank in France, Crédit Agricole, the third largest bank in France, they're on life support. The Italian banking system, which is a very large system, people may not know this, but Italy is the third largest economy in Europe. And it's got a real industrial base which has been eroded and is being destroyed. So what's happening is that the European Central Bank, under Goldman Sachs ally and alumni Mario Draghi, has been talking about buying and buying like the Federal Reserve, quantitative easing. What they're doing is they're increasing the overall debt by giving money to banks to shore up their positions and enable them to carry worthless derivatives on their balance sheets. But that's not enough. They're even buying junk denominated corporate bonds now. They're buying anything they can. They're probably going to go buy croque monsieurs on the street corners of Paris to pour money into the system. They're going with negative interest rates. And since the last time we talked, Germany has issued 10-year bonds at negative interest rates. Who in their right mind would buy that? Well, they're giving banks the money to go out and buy bonds that they know are worthless. And this is just going to be another market for suckers. But the suckers market, at a certain point, you run out of suckers. And now the suckers are the banks themselves. And so this is why what LaRouche was saying on Sunday is that this is the opportunity for men of courage who have been speaking softly behind the scenes to come forward and say, look, this system is dead. We cannot reform it. We have to move out from under it. Let's take a lifeline from the BRICS, from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and let's let some of these parties collapse along with the banks. Now, we may be seeing chaos in the political system. So what? We're seeing chaos in people's lives because of the corruption and collapse of the political system. So let's look for some specific direction to change it.
Yeah, and you mentioned men of courage. I just want to circle back and mention Nigel Farage's name one more time. Again, the European Ron Paul. Men of courage can make a big difference, and we're seeing big differences being made globally as we speak. This is an exciting time to be alive, Harley. People need to get skin in the game because every single one of the listeners, every single one of us can make a difference too by getting off the couch, stop armchair quarterbacking, and get in the game. That's where Harley Schlanger and the folks at LaRouche are. Harley, you mentioned Obama earlier. He's the complete opposite of a man of courage, and you mentioned him going to the UK and lecturing the British people about why they need to stay in the EU. And I don't know if you saw that chart over at Zero Hedge, but that was the exact moment, the inflection point at which the surge to leave the EU, that sentiment surged after he went over there and lectured the British people. He's a lightning rod for dislike. He's the antithesis of liberty, and he is the face of empire, of evil empire, and of overreach, and the whole world knows it, and he's going to hand that baton to Hillary Clinton. God forbid if that happens.
Remember what he said also. He said, and this also enraged a lot of people in Europe, he said Europe needs Britain. Britain's involvement in the European Union has improved Europe. Now, most of the people I talk to in Europe look at the British as parasites, as speculators, as people who launch coups and work with the CIA around the world to destroy governments. Now, just you mentioned Hillary. One of the important things that's going on now is Hillary's coordination with Netanyahu. And you have all these groups, Republicans and others, saying that, Hillary is against Israel and the Democrats are against Israel. Forget it. The policy of the Obama administration with Hillary as Secretary of State was oriented toward doing whatever the Israelis, the Saudis, and the Turks wanted because those three governments in the Middle East were the main actors as part of this Anglo-American PNAC, the Project for a New American Center,
That's right.
Century of the neocons, and then the Brzezinskiites on the neoliberals. They're all oriented toward disrupting the potential for peace in the Middle East. And the real target in this is not Syria, it's Russia. Now, you talk about men of courage. You look at what Putin has done. He's not fallen into the traps that have been set. He's mobilizing like crazy. He's going to be in Finland this week. Why Finland? Because there's a big effort to pull Finland into the NATO buildup on the Russian border. So I think what you just brought up a moment ago is really important. There are a lot of people of goodwill who are on your site and similar sites who are looking for answers, but they keep falling back into this pessimism. We can't win. We're outnumbered. That Sean, you and I are naive optimists. We don't realize how controlled we are. The only person who's controlled is the person who doesn't fight because they don't think you can win, and it's already there's a predisposition or predestination in the world. There's nothing that's predestined that can't be beaten. It may take a while. I've been at this for 40-something years. I've lost a lot of day-to-day battles in my lifetime. It hasn't changed my view at all that essentially human beings are good, but they're dominated by institutions that play on their satanic impulses. Mm-hmm. And that's why people like Obama get elected. That's why people like Bush get elected. That's why people like Netanyahu can stay around in power for so long. Our job is to speak boldly and tell the truth. And if someone says you can't win, just tell them, go out and fight. Let's see whether you can win or not.
Yeah.
So many people have that view who don't do a thing except sit there and read about how powerful these guys are. These guys are losing money. They're seeing their whole systems collapse. Their corporations are unraveling. Their institutions like the European Union are coming apart. So this is why I think you're right, this is such a beautiful moment in history where people who have ideas and who look to better human beings to make the human race better rather than to say, look how bad things are. We have an opportunity to change things now.
Yeah, speak boldly and tell the truth. I love that, Harley. And I just want to say this, too, for folks. You guys got to keep in mind, if we take a look at these chess-playing monsters, these New World Order controllers that appear to have so much power, but appear also to have things crumbling around them. Imagine Kissinger, Brzezinski, Soros, Rockefeller. They're old, decrepit men. These are fragile human beings. They're not gods. And you know what? I listen to V, the guerrilla economist, a lot. I interview him as well, and I know you and he talk. V says the same thing, and he loves to recount their failures. He loves to quantify their failures. And there are many of them. These guys are not omnipotent. They're not omniscient, and they can be beaten, Harley.
A perfect example is Hillary Clinton, who thought she was going to waltz into the White House in 2008. That wasn't the plans for the elite at that time. Now, she's their choice. You see the neocons lining up behind her.
Well, I want to jump in. Not only is she their choice, she is literally, quite literally, a Rothschild puppet. Lady Rothschild held a $100,000 per head fundraiser for Hillary Clinton. And somehow, Harley, I can't even imagine how or why, there are brainwashed people in this country who actually want that criminal, and I mean a hardcore criminal that is quantifiable. The only thing standing between her and prison is Loretta Lynch. There are people in this country that actually want that woman, because she's a woman, in the White House. It's stunning. She should be in prison.
Well, I think that people have to look at the fact that she took until June to defeat Bernie Sanders, who was a very weak opponent. The only thing Bernie had going for him was a pretty good rap about Wall Street. But at the same time, he kept defending Obama. And so Hillary couldn't even win the nomination from him because Democrats weren't voting. The ones who voted for her were the ones who had this idea that we need a woman for the sake of a woman. And I like what Susan Sarandon said. She said, just because someone has a vagina doesn't mean I'm going to support them.
Yeah, I heard her say that. I think she said that on the Bill Maher show.
Yeah, so, what we're dealing with here is a breakdown of a consensus or the Washington narrative. Now, they're still powerful. They're wreaking havoc in Brazil. They're trying to destroy Argentina. They are running operations in India and in South Africa. But I'll tell you, the Indian government is fairly strong right now. The Chinese are transcendent. I mean, they are moving internationally, and they're moving with American system ideas, building water systems, rail, corridors of development, creating jobs, creating real wealth. And the Russians are working with them. And the BRICS idea, it's got some problems. You can't supplant a system that's been in place since 1945 in a year. But they're recruiting other governments to them. I can tell you, business groups in Germany, in Austria, in France, in Italy are sending their representatives to Russia and China. There's a huge Chinese influence now among the rail industry, which is collapsing in Europe, with the idea that they're going to be built up for this international Silk Road policy. So, you can see a new system emerging, which is a system which is more democratic, but which is more democratic because it's based on the idea that you increase the wealth of a society by increasing the productivity of its workforce, which means education, which means improved standard of living, as opposed to what we're doing in the West, which is sending all the wealth into funny money, into speculation, into Ponzi schemes, and stealing from the elderly, the poor, the working class, the middle class, and there's a rebellion because of it. That rebellion needs leadership, not cheerleading, but leadership. People need to be educated to know how it can work differently. And, I commend you for raising these questions, and also people like V who, don't hold back their punches. And
Right.
this is the time to do that.
Yeah, well, I commend you, Harley. You know that because you guys actually have skin in the game, just like our friend Grindile61, who has one of the best YouTube channels out there because he's a real, true activist. He's out there 24/7. I mean, literally every single day exposing Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 policies in California on the local level, disrupting meetings on the county level and the city level, and explaining to people how they're serving masters, international masters, because so many of the people on the local level don't even know it. I'm going to leave people with this soundbite from Grindile61 as it pertains to Brexit.
This story up to this point is the single biggest story of all of 2016, and this might even be the biggest story of the last decade. If this vote is allowed to stand and the UK actually pulls out of the European Soviet Union, this will change the entire trajectory of the world. And so why is this so important to America? This is important because of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Obama and the globalists want to merge America into a 12-member Pacific Union superstate. That union would include Asia-Pacific nations, Mexico and Canada. If the European Soviet Union starts to break apart, then it is going to be very hard to force America into a Pacific Union. So this goes without saying that this is a really big deal. And I have to say that for the first time in many years, I actually have some faith in the world. I also have a little more faith in elections right now than I did yesterday. And the reason why I say that is because I expected the EU to pull its strings and their cheating would overwhelm the people voting for the Brexit. But there are so many people who want sovereignty that not even EU cheating could overcome the people's desire to be free. Now, I have been very negative about Donald Trump's ability to capture the presidency because he is going up against the Clinton machine, the biggest cheaters in the world. But if voters can overcome the cheating of the unelected EU, then Donald Trump voters can overcome the cheating of the Hillary Clinton campaign. So let's take a look at the country-by-country breakdown. England, more than any other country in the UK, wanted out of the EU. The same goes for Wales. They also wanted out of the EU, but it turns out that Scotland and Northern Ireland are countries full of cucked slaves because they like being controlled and dominated by an unelected government in a foreign country. Why is that? Why do Scotland and Northern Ireland want to be controlled by somebody else that doesn't even speak their language? And so once again, I have to say that I am completely shocked that we are seeing this result today, as this will have major implications for years to come.
Well, Harley, you used the term men of courage earlier in this interview. I think Nigel Farage is one. I think our friend Grindal61 on YouTube is one. And I think you're one. You guys have skin in the game. How do people get educated on these issues? Can you tell people more about the website, the LaRouche PAC website?
Sure, just go to larouchepac.com and navigate your way through it. I'm hoping in the next few days we'll have some of these conference presentations from the conference we just had in Berlin, which was really quite amazing because you had people from, I think, 12 nations spoke. We had representatives from 12 countries who spoke, and who all had a common sense that here's an opportunity for us. There were a couple who were saying, look, the Brexit vote shocked me. I had to change my speech because of it, because I was going to come in and say, how do you beat these guys? Now I see we can beat them. So look at the larouchepac.com, LAROUCHEPAC.com, for reports from the conference in Berlin. Beyond that, every single day we post things, and what we're doing in the United States, what we're doing internationally, the role that Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche are playing to pull together support in Europe and the United States to break with the transatlantic elites and work with this new potential system. So that's the best thing people can do.
All right. And guys, I just want to leave people with this idea, this thought that I think we have hit an inflection point for humanity. I think the best news in the world, Harley, is that people can make a difference. Each and every single one of us. We're not helpless, hopeless little people controlled by elites in this giant Illuminati pyramid. Take a look at that pyramid. The base is the biggest, strongest part of the pyramid. It's the base that holds the pyramid up, and we're all at the base. It's time we climb up that pyramid and topple those who are at the very head of it.
Let me conclude by just giving two examples. The New York Times editorial on Brexit said that this is too bad because Western institutions could be weakened and the beneficiaries will be Russia and China. That's already happened.
Yeah.
The Wall Street Journal said, gee, this could weaken the consensus on sanctions. That's already happened. They're weeping after the gate's been closed behind them. We've got to get through that gate and move things quickly, and we can beat these guys.
Yeah, and I just want to say that New York Times sentiment, that type of editorial, that type of editorializing, those are CFR talking points. That's Rockefeller Council on Foreign Relations playbook stuff. Hardly they're dealing with an old playbook. It's like history is changing before their eyes, and they're still dealing with their old playbook.
Well, they still need someone to change their adult diapers every couple of hours also, so they're a little slow on the uptake.
No, I'm not kidding, guys. Just think of how old these people are. Kissinger, Soros, Brzezinski. Hillary. I mean, these are old, decrepit people. It's time for humanity to rise. We can beat them. We actually have them on the ropes. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. And Harley, thanks so much for your time. This was a fun and, I think, inspiring talk.
All right, Sean. It's always good to be with you.
All right. Well, I hope you come back soon. And guys, thanks for all your support at sgtreport.com, the corporate propaganda antidote. We do our level best day in and day out to bring you real news, honest news, truthful news, 24/7. God bless.